Hello everyone, I have just read chapter 3 of Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. Again, this was a very lengthy chapter. It feels like it just went on and on and on, and I think it's just because it kind of was going a lot into explanations, and it got a bit, I think it got a bit much and went on for a bit too long. But anyway, we open this chapter with Aona Cantor, who is lying on the jagged hilltop, and she's looking at a volcanic dome, which is it's her position is less than 10 kilometers from a huge smoking volcanic dome, and she's looking at it through her electro binoculars, and she's on Mindor. And we're told that the fact this huge volcanic dome was huge and smoking was of no interest to her at all. She cared only about the double ring of planetary defence turbo laser towers that surrounded it, and the gnat clouds of TIE fighters that streamed in and out of every visible cavern mouth on the mountainside. Which is that is how it had looked every time she's gotten a glimpse. And she just says that she doesn't get it and asks for Trip, and asks if Trip is sure about the jammers. And from a few meters below and behind her, a man who's wearing a similar suit to her, and she can't be picked up because of the suit she's wearing. She's infrared won't really pick her up because she's already quite warm, and she's blending in with the kind of lava volcanic stuff around her. She's got lava on her suit as well, so she's kind of in the perfect camouflage as well. But anyway, Trip and the others who are dressed just like her, he says that he can tell her what Boki tells him, and it's the subspace is clear, and if they want to, they could send a signal all the way to the Trigaskian system, Trigaskian blur, sorry, and Aona just wonders why Shadow Spawn would turn off its subspace jammers right after a raid. Trip says, well, ask Shadow Spawn, and Aona says that if she ever gets the chance, she'll have other things to talk about, and someone says that they got something, which is farther down the hillside into the cave where the rest of the men are waiting. And Aona tells Trip to tell him to keep keep their voices down, because they've been found multiple times by the black shells, as they call them, which is really just Shadow Spawn's forces, the Shadow Troopers, which I know. And he tries to argue with Aona, but she says that the black shells have found them, and they could have seeded the hills with sonic probes, and there might be a ground patrol. And she asks, how do the melters keep finding us? Do you know? And she says, me neither. Until we do, the next guy who speaks above a whisper will get my blaster barrel across the face. Aona. And the next guy who argues with me is gonna get it. I'm not gonna continue that. And Trip says, all right, she, relax. And he makes his way down the hill and finds out what it was. And he says it was nothing, and Aona asks, what kind of nothing? And Trip just says, it's a nothing kind of nothing, just a couple of things. And Aona asks, just a couple pings. Sorry, not things. easy mix up. And Aona's scowl deepens, and she goes, pings? And Trip says, yeah, some kind of signal, and an echo, like a transponder response. And she says, I know what a ping is, where did the initializer come from? And Trip explains it was outside the system, probably, and a HoloNet repeater or something. And she asks, and the response came from here? And Trip says, well, yeah, how do you know that? She's already scrambling down. I assume she's shouting as she says, up, everybody up. And she says to... And she And she says to lock and load, and she wants every speeder, swoop and skimmer in the air in 5, no supplies except weapons, power cells and medkits, and full alert. And Trip goes, alert, what's going on? And she said, and Aona says, you think it's coincidence that after months, those jammers go down just now, just in time to let through a transponder ping that's probably coming from some kind of tracker? Trip frowned. What, it's a trap? Not for us, and we need to make sure we don't step into it. And Aona checks her blaster, and gets her blaster and checks its charge and puts it back in its holster, with a very smooth spin. And she says, we'll wait and watch, but we need to be ready to move. And then we cut away into the volcanic dome. And it's really to say, and this is the bit where it drags on and on and on and on, and you know, if this was in like Master of the Jedi, it would have gotten to the point. And I think this is a problem with the book, and I'm not looking forward to summarising this bit of the chapter. I'm really not looking forward to it. And you know, when I was reading Master of the Jedi, if this was a chapter in Master of the Jedi, this would not have been as dragged out as it was. This would not have been as dragged out as it was. But we saw that Group Captain Click is standing at attention just outside a door, and which is pretty much a starfighter-sized archway door carved, it's a huge slab of, and the door's a huge slab of steel that seals a starfighter-sized archway carved from the wall of the volcanic cavern. And he's got his helmet under his arm, and he's oblivious to all the screams and pleas. And please, did I say peas? Please, and curses from everyone in the room near. We're told that soon enough the slab will pull aside, and a pawn, that's pawn with a capital P, will come to beckon, and Click will be ushered into the presence of Lord Shadow Spawn. And we're told to suffer the consequences of his failure. And we're told a bit about his description, which I'm not going to get into, and it says, when he took off that helmet, anyone who knew stormtroopers knew they were looking at something special. Click was one of the original threats, a veteran of the Clone Wars from Geonosis to the Jedi Rebellion. The Jedi Rebellion being what was being Palpatine's propaganda for what Order 66 was. And he says, and he was proud of it. This was his sole point of vanity. He never minded the slightly silly sound of his call sign, hung on him by a humour challenge Jedi Padawan some 25 years ago. Click was short for kilometre, which I've always wondered what a click was, so that's actually really good. We're told a reference to his crochet identifier of TP, Trooper Pilot 1000, which I don't really get what that's meant to be a reference to. I guess it's how Trooper Pilots travel kilometres? I don't know. And we're told that the vast cavern around him had been expanded and shaped from the local melt massive stone. And it's been fusion formed into a vault of black glass. And there's reflections from the light globes that float about 10 metres above the polished floor. We're told that scattered across the floor are clots of prisoners standing or sitting or lounging in as much comfort as they possibly can in this uncomfortable area. And we're told the prisoners are a motley group, from beggars to aristocrats, thieves to rebel officers, and we're told that these are actually targets of the raids Click's Defender Wings had actually been conducting throughout the Ridge over the past months. And we're told it's taking 3 or 4 here, half a dozen there, and never so many that the rebels might suspect anything. We're told the loot taken on these raids and the destruction left behind was no more than camouflage, just so that these prisoners would just be written off by everyone, and that they just went missing or are presumed dead in the resulting mass slaughter. So these prisoners could be permanently disappeared, as it says. We're told disappeared here to Mindor, to the sorting centre of Lord Shadow Spawn, which again I know is Cronal. I assume there's going to be some big reveal later on, because they really are getting into who's Cronal, what's he about. Oh, actually, while it's on my mind, I get why it's called Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor now, not just Shadows of Mindor, because it's in reference to, you know, all the stories in this in this book. But anyway, because again, I know what happens at the end anyway. And we're told that behind Click, about 4 or 5 pawns are drifting among the prisoners, and it says the hems of their long robes trailing behind them. Here and there a pawn might stop. The red limoned shadow of his broad crescent headgear falling across this prisoner or that. These pawns never spoke, and their expressions never changed, couldn't change, as their faces were only hollow masks projected by their crowns. But sometimes a pale hand would extend from a darkly voluminous sleeve. If the prisoner was lucky, a slicing gesture would bring a quick burst of molasses fire to the back. If the prisoner was less lucky, a long pale finger laid upon his head would indicate that this prisoner had been elected to the pawns. And then we're told that and it says a sudden whine of a neural stunner in the cavern behind him. Click judges that there's been another captive who's been elected to the pawns, and surely enough, about a 15 or 16-year-old boy, or that says human youth, maybe not a boy, you never know, it doesn't specify a gender, is being silently, being dragged. He's unconscious, and the slab moves back the door for the pawns. And we're told that Click remains at attention without the slightest flicker of expression as the pawns go past him through the archway and down the corridor. And we're told that he'd been waiting at attention ever since the defender wing of his starfighter group had limped home from its disastrous attack on the false Corellian Queen. So again, he was in the first chapter, technically. And we're told that he had been we're told he was fully prepared to wait all day and the next, and Click was willing to wait all week and even wait till he starved to death. And we're told that it wasn't from fear of Shadow Spawn's anger, because we're told the Lord of the Shadow Throne was no lunatic like the assassin Vader to slaughter a subordinate in the fit of pique. I think it's pique, or pike, maybe it's pike, P-I-Q-U-E. I've never pronounced that before. And it says what held Click in place was nothing more nor less than a passionate desire to be worthy of the trust Shadow Spawn had placed in him. If doing so would help advance the great cause, Click would stand at attention until he starved to death. And we're told a bit about Click's story and Shadow Spawn's story, and what had happened with Shadow Spawn, how he came to power. And we're told that group captain Click had once been a squadron leader nearly a year before, when on the day of now this is talking from the perspective of the Empire, you know, as far as Click knows. And it says how the day, on that black day when Lord Vader's treason and his cowardly murder of Palpatine the Great, as it says, had allowed the Alliance and allow the rebels to escape the trap on Endor. And the destruction of the second Endor having nothing compared to the shattering dislocation of the Imperial forces had suffered with Palpatine being gone. And we're told that without the leadership of Palpatine, the Imperial military pretty much just splintered into competing factions, just squabbling over whatever territory they could get. You know, local moffs or regional admiralty commanders. And we're told that conflicts had smouldered and skirmishes had flared between Imperials because they're just wanting that as much territory as they can. And then came Shadow Spawn. And we're told that no one knew his real name. No one knew from whence he came from. Actually, what is whence? Yeah. Oh, from a place or source. Okay, I thought that would be like when. You know, when he came in the picture, but no. Okay. We're told that no one knew whence he came from. We're told that it was so clear, as it came from his voice, that he wasn't a moth. And he was no general or admiral with delusions of imperial grandeur, as it says. But it says to be received into Shadow Spawn's presence was almost as awe-inspiring as being ushered into Palpatine's presence. We're told that when the rumour began to spark in the Imperial regions of a new leader, a man of mystery with mystery with cunning and charisma, with the cunning and charisma of a second coming of Palpatine, as it says. Click had been promoted to Wing Commander by another remnant leader, Admiral Craven, who was a self-styled warlord in the Mid-Rim Stellar Cluster. And he sent his squadron to destroy Shadow Spawn, Shadow Spawn's upstart, but instead of fighting back, they welcomed Click. He welcomed Click's fighter wing with welcome instead of combat. And he greeted him with an array of authentic command codes, even Palpatine's secret command codes for the clones. The ones that have been buried deep in Click's programming in the Crochet on Camino. And Shadow Spawn had claimed to be handpicked by Palpatine to be his steward, to hold the throne in trust of Palpatine's chosen heir. Palpatine had given these codes to him so that every loyal clone would know Shadow Spawn for the galaxy's rightful, if temporary, ruler. And we're told that it had been Shadow Spawn who has revealed to Click the tale of Vader's treason. How the monster's murder of his longtime friend and benefactor, and how the tale was so dark and gruesome, and even now Click just shudders to think of it. And we're told how Vader would have died years ago without Palpatine's generosity and caring. And we know that's definitely not the case. He's not generous or caring. But it says that he would have died years ago without Palpatine's generosity and caring. And he had saved his life free of any charge at one of the Emperor's great legacies, the Emperor Palpatine Surgical Reconstruction Center on Coruscant, which we actually visited in Last of the Jedi and Against the Empire, if you remember, as Empal Su Recon. And we're told that he had not only saved Palpatine's generosity, and not only saved Vader's life, but somehow gifted him with cybernetics, and helped remake a helpless cripple into perhaps the most feared and powerful man the galaxy had ever known. We're told it was just a small part of the greatest holo thriller Click has ever seen, which was the one the Shadow Spawn himself had created. And I knew this was the one that Shadow Spawn created because I spoiled myself on it. I need to stop looking at Wikipedia. I'll keep spoiling myself. And we're told that the holo thriller is the one that was brought up in the last chapter, Luke Skywalker and the Jedi's Revenge. And we're told a bit more about the details of it. And we're told that it's now circulating among the systems that are still loyal to the Empire. And we're told that how the holo thriller had shown in vivid detail how Vader's madness had grown with his unholy ambition, as it says, how he pretended to play along with Palpatine's quest to rescue the last remaining child of Anakin Skywalker, as it says, from the evil web of lies from which the rebels had snared him, all while wanting to become a ruler, all while wanting to betray Palpatine and take the position of Emperor for himself. And we saw that how on the day Luke had finally stood before Palpatine on the bridge of the second Death Star, and he declared his love for Luke's father. That's when Vader had, which as all on his clones knew, Anakin had been Palpatine's most beloved protege until his tragic, untimely death in the Jedi Rebellion, as it says, because again, everyone thinks Anakin and Vader are separate. And we're told that's when Vader's mind had snapped, and it was Vader, as the holo thriller had made so painfully clear, who always dreamed of being Palpatine's successor, and he believed himself to be that beloved protege. And he even tried to bend Luke's mind to evil to assist him in that plan, and he rejected Vader's insane machinations, as it says. So when Palpatine reveals that love, and that he alone was, as it says, the son of Palpatine's beloved companion, the child of the sole Jedi to remain loyal to the Senate and the Chancellor during the Jedi Rebellion, was to be the new Emperor, Vader could no longer control his rage. With a roar of mindless fury, he attacks with a he attacks like a blood-mad rancor. And we're told that Skywalker was too much in had been too much in daze to do anything initially when they just struck down Palpatine. And with a righteous fury, he stood up against Vader and killed him. But it was too late to save Palpatine. Says poor Skywalker could only avenge the great man's death, the great man being Palpatine. And we're told that although Click knew that what he'd seen was only a dramatic reenactment, it just seemed so real. There was something so real and powerful about it, and that it was a greater, it seemed more like a greater truth than facts. And Shadow Spawn had explained, it doesn't say this in quotes, but I'm going to say it in my Shadow Spawn voice. It was Luke Skywalker's grief and guilt at his failure to save the Emperor that had driven him back into the grasp of the rebels. Skywalker believed he deserved no better to be just another outlaw among the thieves, pirates and murderers of the Rebel Alliance. What I've gathered from Shadow Spawn, he seems very calm in this. But anyway, and he then had said to Click, and this is what I ask of you, Wing Commander, that you join me in my quest to fulfill the dying wish of our beloved Emperor, to heal the broken heart of the son of the last true Jedi hero, and to put Luke Skywalker, Palpatine's chosen heir, in his rightful place as the absolute ruler of our galactic empire. And Click, having proud to surrender his forces to Shadow Spawn's struggle to bring the galaxy together again. And we're told there was we're told that Click could think of no greater honour than to honour Palpatine's chosen heir, and to put down his life for Palpatine's chosen heir. And we're told that Lord Shadow Spawn rewarded his devotion with a promotion that he could command his own fighter group. And we're told that he only hoped he could somehow survive the struggle to kneel before and pledge his service to Luke. Now, we're far beyond the archway. The fusion formed corridor stone. One of the pawns pauses and looks back and turns as if he's heard Click's thought, and and a pale hand comes and beckons him. And Click follows him into the election centre, and we're told this is his first time in the election centre, and he knows what to expect. And we're told that he tried to train himself to not look at the elect, and he tried to not hear them, and tried to discipline his mind to not think of them as the unfortunate, and instead think of them as privileged, chosen, the luckiest of the lucky, yanked from despair into a once-in-a-millennium great opportunity to serve the great cause. And he tried and failed that. And we're told that every time he enters this place, the elects were not invisible or inaudible, and he's just never been able to think of them as lucky. And we're told that they were always and always will be just terrified victims, helplessly screaming or sobbing or pleading for their lives. And we're told that, and it says sentient sacrifices tragically necessary to Shadow Spawn's plan for Skywalker's eventual victory. And then we're told that the pawns ahead of him drag the stunned prisoner stunned teenager to a pawning table, and they kind of liquefy it with something, and then they submerge the teenager into it. And they kind of mould the hardening stone around his neck and jaw. And this is where the gruesome stuff comes in. So if you don't like gruesome stuff, I'd say skip ahead a bit. Maybe, or maybe just stop watching here, because it gets a bit gruesome here. And we're told about how they start cutting into the skull. This upper hemisphere of the skull, the top part of his skull, and to kind of expose his brain. And that's where they put in, and they also burn off all his hair as well, to do so. And we're told that this is not what causes a screaming or sobbing. And we're told the elect will never even awake enough to experience the pain of this. And we're told that this will begin particularly after an elect wakens, with a series of neural probes that selectively stimulate different things. that stimulate different nerve clusters of their exposed brains. And we're told the anguish is short-lived though, because they would activate like the tickle senses, which make them uncontrollably giggle, and then they stimulate the olfactory neurons, which would make them ask for a slice of bantha steak that he believed to be smelling, and perhaps a mug of that delightful rich hot chocolate that they would be quite certain someone would be brewing just out of sight. And then we're told that at each and every point, the nerves that registered and we saw that from the nerves that register the colour blue to the nerves that control the curl of the electrodes, the pawns replace a tiny crystal of melt massive, the same stone as the table, the same stone as the entire election centre, and the vault outside. And after the skull was replaced, these crystals would grow into a gem-like latticework, spreading throughout the elect's brain cavity. And we're told that every pawn has a head full of diamonds, has a head full of crystals, and Click doesn't know what the criteria is for the elect, nor does he understand the ranking for the elect, because some of them seem to be in command, and then the ones who are in command seem to be subordinate to some of the ones that just commanded. So it's a bit confusing for Click, and he assumes it has something to do with their crescent crown. And he knows that once they've been fitted with that crescent crown, and released as full as a pawn, they knew they were instantly superior of any trooper, pilot or officer, and his slightest gesture was to be obeyed as though it had proceeded from Lord Gyrospan himself. We're told few of the pawns spoke. Again, they don't have faces. But we're told there's a peculiar eloquence in their gestures that can make even the dumbest of troopers understand what they mean. And Click suspects it has something to do with the Force, and we're told he never understood the Force, but he never doubted its existence because of all the Jedi. We're told he has no interest in understanding it either. And we're told he was bred for obedience, and he's just content letting that Force be mysterious and as a way to explain the unexplainable. We're told like how, for example, Lord Shadowspawn could seemingly mould the stone, the Melt Massive stone, with simply his will alone. And he demonstrated it numerous times, as if it was almost alive. And we're told that Click had witnessed it more than once, so the Shadowspawn would outstretch his hand and he would reshape the stone into whatever was necessary, into his wildest desire. And then another pawn beckons him. He makes his way over. And it starts making its way down the corridor towards Shadowspawn. And the Melt Massive Stone, the wall or door, it kind of melts back, lets him through, and it closes again. And we're told, and he just keeps marching down with confidence, not faltering, and we're told that if the stone should fail to part before him, should Lord Shadowspawn see fit to entomb him alive, as punishment for his failure, he would stand and wait until his air ran out, and then he would go to sleep forever. Which again is really oddly phrased. And we're told that no clone spawned in Kamino and pods could suffer from claustrophobia, or comprehend it, but anyway, or suffer from it. Anyway, it feels the breezes of air, and he eventually makes his way out into a chamber of perfect night. And that's when he hears Lord Shadowspawn's voice. And you can't see him, it sounds like it's coming from everywhere and nowhere, the voice, but he hears him. And Shadowspawn says, "Hold, group captain, stand apart. My lord, I regret to inform my lords that do not regret, Click, only inform." And he explains about how the Corellium Queen was not even a ship, and how it was more than likely a trap by the rebels, and they somehow knew they were coming. And he wonders if this will be his death sentence. And Shadowspawn asks, "Did they?" As in, when you explain that somehow they knew they were coming. And Click says that they must have known they were coming, because they were lying in wait and they had a new weapon to combat the defenders, and they had 30% casualties. And he says, "My lord, there must be a rebel spy here on Mindor." "Must there? Can you conceive no alternate explanation?" I can't, my lord." "I can. But continue. There is more, is there not?" Yes, my lord. We have detected a signal, some sort of subspace transponder, and remember, he explains that they trace it back to the defenders damaged in the Corellium 1 attack. And they detected it when the subspace steering system was deactivated, and Gyrospawn just goes, ah. And Click says it must be the work of the rebel spy, and it must be. And Shadow Spawn explains that the jammers being deactivated was done on his order. And Click is just confused, because he wonders, is Shadow Spawn about to betray his own cause? His own great cause, as it is called? And it says, my lord, I fear those torpedoes were used to plant some sort of tracking device. Alas, my lord, Click, you have done well. Very well indeed. My lord, I believe the rebels have found us. According to the most recent intelligence reports, they have an entire task force of constant ready alert. My lord, a fleet could be on its way here right now. Could be? No, it is. Shall I sound the general quarters, my lord? Of course not. We cannot have our unexpected guests discover we've been expecting them, can we? Are we so rude? Click just hopes that question's rhetorical, and Shadow Spawn orders for the combat space patrol to stand down and return to their bases, but to stay within their ships and keep their engines hot. And also ask the gravity crew stands ready for initiation on his commands. Click says, but if they strike while their forces are grounded, then that could cost them the battle. And Shadow Spawn says, we will lose this battle, said the voice from the darkness. We must. Losing this battle is how we will deliver the Empire to its rightful ruler, Emperor Skywalker. And that's how we end the chapter. This chapter felt like it just went on and 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 on, and it was frustrating because of that. This chapter, it got a bit frustrating after a while with all the details we were going into, and they are necessary details. But you could have made it less complicated. You know, and I think this is something I keep bringing up with this book. It makes itself unnecessarily convoluted and complicated. And while I don't really think that's a different kind of convoluted and complicated to what was in this chapter. You know, I think this is probably the first chapter where we haven't really had any convoluted or complicated stuff. There were a couple intangible stuff. I think that's what it is. No, that means you can't touch anything. Intelligible, I think that is. I think that's the word I'm looking for. The word where it just makes you go, something you can't hear. It's similar to that, where it's, there was one of those lines that was, I can't remember what the line was, I pointed it out earlier, and it just made me go, hey? There are bits like that. And it does make you wonder, does make you think, hey? But, it's not the worst. Not the worst at all. And I did quite enjoy this chapter. Again, I think just my main problem is that it just went on and on and on, and it doesn't need to keep going on and on and on and on and on. So yeah, I'm interested to see what Aina, what was her name? Aina not Casanova. Not Casanova. Aona Cantor. Well, I don't know why Castor. Something like that came to mind, or Casanova. Aona Cantor. I'm interested to see what she is, but it's a bit. I assume she's a rebel spy. I assume she's a rebel spy, but there's something that tells me that she's not a rebel spy for some reason. There's just something about her that I can't quite figure out. It's one of those things that we need to learn a bit more about what's going on. So yeah. I think Shadow Spawn's plan, to put that propaganda out is really interesting and really clever, and you understand why he wants to lose this battle. And the thing is, I do know a little bit about what Shadow Spawn's intending to do. which is to actually become Luke Skywalker, move into that body of his. I know that's something he's intending to do, which is why he wants Skywalker there, you know. And with this propaganda, it just will make it easier to make it seem like Skywalker, but this is Skywalker's heir to the throne, you know. He's thinking 100 steps ahead. But I also get a sense of manipulative, calm, and more understanding. You know, he's much calmer and more understanding than Vader. That's what I'm getting, at least. You know, and he even when he knows the whole situation, you know, he lets Click continue with his own beliefs and what he thinks the situation is, and this is a much better interpretation than Colonel than Gambler's World ever did. Gambler's World didn't really do anything for Colonel, you know, it just gave him that first appearance, really. You could just replace him with an Imperial officer. There was nothing really to distinguish him from any other character in the Empire. Aside from, you know, like the significant ones like Vader, Tarkin, Palpatine. But, you know, he's just your generic officer in Gambler's World. So it's nice to see him getting that bit of contrast in here. And I think he's quite interesting here at the moment. It's quite interesting. I also find it interesting that we got a clone in here. I was not expecting to get a clone at all. So to get a clone in this, you know, that's quite good as well. I was not expecting to have a clone in this story. I wonder, actually, this makes me wonder if Click Clone Trooper, because I wonder if he's from Shatterpoint, because I know he's been in... No, he's just from Mindor, okay. It's because I know there's a lot of characters in this book that are from Shatterpoint. And then there's quite a few characters in this book from Shatterpoint, so I was interested to see if it was a Shatterpoint, but no, he ain't. Yeah, I think it's quite interesting to see how some of these things go. You know, it's quite interesting to see, you know, we see a bit more about we see the power of pawns, how the elects become pawns, and it's really quite gruesome. It's definitely not something. Again, that's why I had to give you that warning. It can get a bit gruesome. Yeah, it was quite interesting. It was an interesting chapter, but I think it just maybe went on a bit too long. And we could have had like the backstory for show Spawn, you know, how he rose to power, you know, can't get sprinkled throughout the story rather than have it be all in one chapter. But, you know, it's not the worst. I do think it is interesting, you know, how he claims that he was Palpatine's chosen heir, etc. And it's really quite interesting how this is all unveiling. But yeah, anyway, thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everybody. I've hated having to read this chapter because it's so long. I hated reading this chapter. It was just so long. Yeah, anyway, I've read chapter 4. I thought I was reading chapter 6. No, it is chapter 4. I'm just going to skip the summary for this chapter. I do not want to go over this again. As much as I should cover it again, this is 20 pages. I do not want to cover this. I think I'm just gonna have to keep this review really short, to the point. This was too long, I think, of a chapter. It was way too complicated at times. It suffers from the problems I brought up before in this book. It's too detailed. You do not need to tell us every single little detail that's going on. That's over. You don't need to tell us every single little detail that's going on. Half the time, I had no idea what on earth was being said, what on earth was going on. Because it's using all the technical Star Wars terms that you're only going to know if you're really, really into the lore. This was just too complicated. This was not Chapter 4 was not enjoyable for me. Really, all you need to know is that Shadow Spawn, Luke figures out Shadow Spawn is black hole. He figures out that this really isn't his style. I really just don't want to think about this chapter. Really, I just want to take the relevant information, continue on. This is way too long, I think. You do not need to make a chapter this long. Especially for what it winds up just amounting to. I hated reading this chapter. It was just too long, and I thought I was reading chapter 6, and chapter 5 actually, and I saw that chapter 7 was like 107 page, wasn't it on 107 page, was on something like 100 and, I don't know. I really just, I know there's going to be a bunch of really long chapters that are going to come up in a moment soon. I do not want to read them. I'm going to continue reading the book, but I'm really not enjoying this. I'm really not enjoying that chapter at all. I have nothing to say in good regards to this chapter, because it's just extended out for too long. And the next chapter is again extended out for too long. It's extended out again for almost 20 pages, for 19... Yeah, actually, yeah, 20 pages. And I know it's going to be just like this. Really extended, and I know the next chapter after that is going to be really extended. I'm not looking forward to reading these next couple chapters. And I did not enjoy this chapter one bit. At the beginning it was fine, then it really got into a bunch of detailed explanations. It got frustrating to read. I just wanted to be over and done with in this chapter. If you're going to read this book, be prepared for overly complicated stuff, for it to be really convoluted, because if you're really not into your Star Wars ships like I am, I'm not really into them. I think you're going to start struggling a bit with this. I was struggling with it. I kind of had to just go with it and accept it. I do not want to think about... Anyway, I do really not want to do a summary of this chapter. Maybe I will do a summary of it at some point. I doubt it. I think I'll finally reach that point where I'm not going to do a summary for this. I'm not going to do a summary for this chapter. I've had enough of making a summary for these chapters. If they're going to be this long, this convoluted, I've had enough of that. I'm not sure if I'll even continue doing the reviews for this book. We'll see how it all goes. I think some of the stuff it has is quite interesting. You have Black Hole in here, who's he's been a bit manipulative, trying to speak to the Mon Calamari eye to eye, and he seems to be concerned with his people, and he winds up having a shuttle crash into the Justice, and it breaks the Justice into 3 sections. And you have Admiral Kalbak is dead now because of that crash. And also Luke finds the victory to just be a bit too easy, because they've won the battle already, and they find it just to be a bit too easy, and the strategy to not make a whole lot of sense, because Mindor isn't really that habitable. it's no longer that habitable since the whole incident with the big crush, and it's a bit. And then of course, then there's and then Shadow Spawn really pushes the attack again. He pushes their attack when they think they've got their victory. It's really, and the New Republic's really struggling to fight them off now, and they need to jump to hyperspace, but they're struggling to because, of course, they created the gravity wells that stop the ships from jumping to hyperspace. And Luke and Tugurimi are still alive. They're still alive. And Luke's about trying to crash land onto a Mindor with with one of the thirds of the ship still intact. And that took me about 2 minutes to summarise. This is 20 pages long, so it probably took me about an hour or two, maybe even 3 to read. This is unnecessarily long. I keep bringing up how this book unnecessarily goes into too much information. This chapter is the definition of too much information. You do not need to tell us about how the TIE interceptors, about how they're more manoeuvrable. You don't need to tell us about all the ships in the battle. You don't need to tell us about how the inner workings of these ships work. You don't need to tell us all of that. You just need to tell us what's going on and what's important to the scene. It does not matter that there are pre-Clone Wars ships there. We don't need to know that. You can just tell us they're pre-Clone Wars ships and leave it at that. We don't need to know the specific models. This chapter was frustrating to read. It was frustrating to read because of how long it was. And the next couple chapters, the next 2, maybe even 3, are quite long as well. And again, this is a 300-page book. But I did some Googling. This 300-page book with about 18 chapters should average out to having about a 16-page chapter per chapter. And I know, of course, that's not always going to happen. But that's so much more. But that is a 4-page difference, and it's a massive difference, especially with how much text is on these pages. There is so much text on these pages. If this was a Last of the Jedi book, where the text is so much bigger, that would probably wind up being about half the book itself. It's ridiculous. If this was a Last of the Jedi book, this would probably be about 40-50 pages, and that's about half the length of a book itself in Last of the Jedi, almost. It's ridiculous. Or at least a third of the length. It's just ridiculous. I did not enjoy this chapter. I don't want to go back and summarise it. Maybe I'll wind up recording a separate review to this and summarise it. But at the moment, I'm just too frustrated to properly sit down and talk about about my thoughts for this. To just summarise this chapter. I'm just too frustrated with it. Okay, it had some interesting stuff, but the moment that the shuttle that was presumably carrying Shadow Spawn ship wasn't hit the Justice, that's the moment the chapter lost its way. That's the moment lost its sense of direction. It just got convoluted from there on out. It was already convoluted and complicated enough, this book. It was already complicated and had enough complications and convolutions in this chapter already. You did not need to continue writing this chapter beyond that point. You could have just separated this into a separate chapter, and honestly I should have probably just stopped reading it from there, especially because it paused there. It cut to another scene. But maybe in me, I have to read a chapter from the first page to the last of it, so. And I did even consider taking a break, actually. But But all you really need to know is that they did see an explosion, is that they've also now seen another explosion from that remnant of the Justice Luke is trying to land. I think it's something like the Loner or the Lancer, that ship. And they've seen an explosion. We told they're about half a light hour out, which I'm fairly sure that's the measurement of distance, not time. And then they say that's it means that Luke Skywalker's dead, and that happens 30 minutes ago. So yeah. Really, all you really need to know is that this was a frustrating chapter to read. And that the rebellion, well, I say rebellion, the New Republic thought they won this battle, but Luke found it as if Luke's recognised they went all according to plan. You know, they were able to find the base. They very easily were able to kind of get what. Nah, I have to kind of look back at the first page of this chapter, which I really do not want to do. Let's say first page. Yeah, I'm really not enjoying this. Yeah, I'm not going to find it. I can't even remember what I was talking about. Okay. Yeah, they just found it as if... No, I remember, but, you know, they found it... Luke found the victory a bit too easy and wondered why Shadow Spawn would set up on Mindor, especially, you know, without capital ships. And Calvac and Luke come to the conclusion that it would be more logistical to set up your ships inside the asteroids, hollow them out, set them up in there, and it's much more invisible there. So why set up a base on Mindor? And they got the kind of somewhat found the base, but it's tough to by judging by where all the turbo laser stuff is. And we're told it's a mostly volcanic planet now. Ever since, because of the meteor strikes on the big crush. But yeah, that's probably about it. Again, everything I've told you in this review is probably about as much as you're going to get in terms of things, in terms of summary. The moments where Luke recognised it was black hole, you know, that was a bit that was quite a good moment. And we're told that the voice reminded him of Vader, and he only ever heard it in Black Hole before. And I found an eye, and Luke. So here it says, could it be? Luke's jaw clenched. Black hole. Calvac swivels one vast eye toward him. You say that like it's a curse. It is for me, Luke said grimly. We've had dealings before. He's an Emperor's hand. I should say was an Emperor's hand. I've seen some reports that suggest he might have been the director of Imperial Intelligence back around the time of Yavin. I should have pegged him right away. That's strange headgear for one thing, but these raids really aren't his style. No? He was more, I don't know, kind of theatrical. He would always appear as a hollow projection of empty space, you know, just an outline filled with distant stars, and Luke's eyes went wide. And he never did his dirty work in person. And that's kind of when he realised, okay, I'm now reading this again. And that's when Luke realises that the shuttle coming towards them is an attack, is attacking, even though it has no weapons. It's flying straight toward them, and then it gets shot by the Justice, and then it kind of splinters past the shields and kind of shreds it, kind of like the proton torpedoes Rogue Squadron had, I guess. But yeah, this chapter was unnecessarily long and convoluted and complicated, and I think that's the best way to describe this book. it is interesting and thought-provoking, but at the same time it is plagued, completely plagued with convoluted and complicated writing that I would not suggest this book to someone who is only just starting into the expanded universe. I would not suggest... you really need to know your ships if you, at the moment. You know, it's talking about subspace and real space, and it's... What on earth are you talking about? It's referring to mass shadows, and all I really know about mass shadows is that they're the big black thing, they're the big black objects in hyperspace. You know, as far as I'm aware, you know, mass shadow generator, that's the first thing that comes to mind, and I know it's definitely not that, because that's a completely different thing. You know, it's talking about all this stuff that makes no sense, and it's for me at least, it's different when you're listening to it because it goes more over your head, but when you're reading it, it's more of a direct source to your head, if that makes sense. You directly have to acknowledge it. So when it does come up, it's distracting. It's frustrating. In an audiobook form, I don't think this would be as bad. But in the form but given there is no audiobook of Mindor, as far as I'm aware, it just makes this frustrating. It just makes it really, really frustrating. And annoying to read. It's just, yeah. If you are going to get this book, just be prepared for it to be convoluted and complicated. Because if you really do not know your ships and stuff, it's going to be frustrating. It's going to be frustrating. I had a really frustrating time with this chapter. The thing is, you could probably cut out probably about 100 or so pages. I'm not even 10 chapters through, but I'm just making a guess here. But you could probably cut out about 100 or so pages, just because they're filled with unnecessarily detailed information. And if you just simplify them, you could probably cut out about 100 or so pages of unnecessarily detailed information. Which honestly would probably do the book a bunch of favours. It would do it a bunch of favours, honestly. But yeah, this was just a really frustrating chapter to read. I'm so happy to be done with this chapter. I know chapter 5 and I'm fairly sure chapter 6 are both going to be 20 pages long as well. I'm really not looking forward to that. On the one hand, you know, it's just going to be like reading 3 Last of the Jedi books, I guess. It is 300 pages. So it's not the worst thing in the world, but yeah, the next couple chapters really better have some interesting stuff going on, because if it's just going to continue being fighting with this amount of detail, it is not going to be an interesting read. You know, we don't need to know Luke took a breath, and how the breath got into his lungs. You know, we don't need to know stuff. We don't need to go into that much kind of detail. You know, it's frustratingly detailed. It's not getting into detail in a good way. It's not getting into detail in a well-written way, in my opinion. It's getting into detail because it can, and it makes it worse because of it. That's just how I'm feeling at the moment. It's just because of being really frustrated with this chapter. But this book really could just have had a lot of shaving down, I think. And I'm not even close to halfway through either. But yeah, I think that brings an end to this review. I know I just can't complain the whole time. I don't really have anything good to say for this chapter. The only good moment was Luke realising it was Black Hole. Really. Oh, R2's in here as well. That was nice to see. Cowback's death. Again, we don't really know the guy, so it's not really impactful. That seems to be a running theme with black hole stories. You know, first we have Thanos, we didn't even know who he was, and now, so his death wasn't impactful. Now we've had Cal back, whose death isn't impactful. You know, yeah, it's just, yeah. Hopefully this gets a lot better as things go on. And I know this is kind of a bit of a Marmite book. Some people love it, some people hate it, but yeah. Anyway, thank you all for watching and goodbye. Okay, this is still a frustratingly long chapter, but at least it isn't as frustrating as, but at least it isn't as infuriating as chapter 4. So I've just read chapter 5 of I wanted to say Last of the Jedi, the Desperate Mission for some reason. I read that back in December. I haven't had said that since December. I've just read chapter 5 of Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. I can't believe I almost said the Last of the Jedi Desperate Mission. That's months ago. You know, it was back in December. I think just before Christmas, actually. But anyway, so Han Solo is in a conference room and he's pretty much being bored, and he's just incredibly bored, and he wonders if it's possible to die of boredom. And he thinks, well, if that were possible, he would have died of boredom 2 days ago. And this is, again, the problem with this book. It gets way too convoluted. And he likes really going into long tangents and explanations that don't actually help you in the story. They just make you go, what? You know, the whole point of being told stuff in the story is to help you understand what's going on. This is not what doing the slightest. This is doing the complete opposite. And we're told that if there was anything worse than sitting around in a room for hours on end with nothing to do but listen to people yap, it had to be sitting around in a room for hours with nothing to do except listen to Mandalorians yap. And we're told that Han hated those guys, and he didn't hate Mandalorians in general, he just hated the ones he met. And we're told about we're told about how the Mandalorians Han has met, what they're like, and this is when he gets into this long explanation, which I'll read out to you, and tell me how it makes sense in the and you'll just see what I mean when I say it goes on long tangents. Han was no bigot. Despite some unfortunate experiences with a certain Mando bounty hunter who, if the Force believed in justice, was still to this very day screaming as he slowly dissolved in the Sarlacc's digestive juices, he didn't hate Mandalorians in general. He just never met a single one of these stuck-up, more studly than thou self-proclaimed mescafs, masters of every single flipping aspect of combat, who could even so much as say good morning without making it sound like he was really saying it better be a good morning, because if you pull anything, I will without hesitation Charlie your weak, peace-loving Corellian butt till you don't even know what galaxy you're in. Tell me that makes sense. without having to go back and break it down. This is what, like, the whole of this book is. You come across this about every 20 seconds in this book. And we're told that he just doesn't hate Mandalorians in general, he just only hates the ones he's actually met. And we're told up it says, Further, some screwed up sense of honour or ethnic pride or something had somehow made these particular Mandalorians unwilling to speak basic during these talks, which didn't stop them from yapping, of course. They just yapped in Mandora, a language that to Han's more than somewhat biased ear made them sound like a pride of sandpanthers trying to cough up hairballs bigger than his head, and this hairball hacking then had to be dutifully translated into basic for the convenience of the chief New Republic negotiator by the chief negotiator's high-strung, hypersensitive, relentlessly neurotic protocol droid who somehow, among his 6 million flipping forms of communication, had never managed to lose that snooty Core World's accent that after hearing it non-stop for a couple of days, cooped up in this room with nothing better to do, made Han want to whop him so hard he's landed somewhere back on Tatooine. You see what I mean by this book goes on long tangents, and these are on the first 2 pages. You know, I'll probably just spit out a whole page. They're on 2 different pages, of course, those little tangents, but yeah. In total, you know, that probably makes up a whole page, those 2 tangents. And it's all the main consideration as to why Han is not wanting to batter up C-3PO is because of Leia. And it's told that she had made a mistake by falling in love with him. And it says, and Han could never shake this lurking dread that if he, say, did something nasty to C-3PO, who, after all, usually meant well, Leia might suddenly wake up and realise what an awful mistake she's made. And we're told that's not that Han would ever admit this, not even to himself or Chewbacca, but we're told most days his ego was pretty much nigh invulnerable to self-doubt, and we're told that on those rare occasions where he found himself getting irritable and depressed, and stuck with way too much time to think rather than do, these little whispers come into his head, and we're told we could only quiet them by privately preferring his personal blood oath that he would never, never, ever, ever give the woman he loved a reason to regret falling for him. And it just goes on. These first 4 pages, you know, they go on for really long tangents. And we're told that they're sitting in a conference room in a pressure dome, which is kind of in a cavern, on an unnamed asteroid on some inner rim system so obscure he can't remember its name. More tending to actually care about what's going on while 3PO translates another string of the Mandalorian scabble in Mindor. And 3PO says, the commander repeats that surrender simply is not possible. And he reiterates the only peaceful solution to this unfortunate situation is for all rebel, and that is New Republic, of course. He doesn't seem to understand the distinction, or it's being deliberately obtuse, but no matter, is for all rebel forces to depart the system forthwith. Of course, this is not his exact phraseology. The literal translation, stripped of vulgarity, is roughly along the lines of, you rebels stay, everybody dies. You rebels leave, everybody savvy, which wholly fails to capture the entirely savage brutality of his vocabulary. Really, Princess, how do you process such coarse language? My vulgarity filter capacitors are on the brink of overload, and... You see what I mean by it's just tangent. You don't need to tell us. You don't need to go on these long tangents, over-explain things, over-tell us stuff. You're going in a bunch of different directions and then rounding back to your original point. It's like a conversation with my mother. You know, we start on one topic, we go on a bunch of other topics, and then we realise just how different the topic we're on is the very first topic we were talking about. It's you know, this book should not be a conversation. This book should not be an accurate representation of a conversation between me and my mother. And we're told that Han doesn't even fully understand what was going on, because they had completely missed the battle that had occurred, and they were off trying to bring another minor star cluster into the Republic, which have some pretty creepy species. It says it was inhabited mainly by hairy spider-looking critters who had thoroughly creeps him out, not least because these, unlike most of the arachnoid races, have very humanoid-looking faces, including mouthfuls of gleaming white, entirely human-looking teeth, and yeah, that would not... no, I don't like thinking about that. But we're told he brought later here, at the summons of the local authorities, because Imperial forces have been defeated and have been routed pretty much. All of it except about 500 or 600 Mandalorian mercenaries, with the exceptions of those 500 or 600 Mandalorians, who had dug around in several trineutronium power plants in the system's main inhabited world. And they threatened and proclaimed themselves ready and willing to detonate these installations if the Republic ship landed on the planet, and it would pretty much eradicate all life on the planet and sterilise it. and again they've taken the world hostage, as it says. And Han's just, we're told Han have been able to gather the final order from the fleeing Imperial commander, have been for the Mandos to deny the planet to Republic forces. In a by any means necessary, which the Mando commander seems to have interpreted in Han's mind as even if you have to kill everybody, including yourselves. And we're told that the New Republic isn't about to give back a system that is quite valuable. You know, it's rich in resources, and it has and manufacturing capacity. And we're told it also had a system-wide referendum, which voted overwhelmingly in the Republic's membership. It's something like 97% recommending the Union. And Han was kind of privately hoping that the 3% lived near those power plants, those imps, as he says. And we're told that the negotiation had disintegrated into a standoff between Leia's rationality and persuasive powers, as it says, Leia's rationality and persuasive powers matched against the rock-ribbed Mandalorian's never surrender nuttiness of the mercenary commander. And we're told it's gotten to the point where Han's actually wanting Lando to arrive. He's looking forward to it. And we're told that this isn't because of anything surrounding their rather unhappy history. But he had kept his gem, but it's because Lando had kept his gem special, and it goes on a bit of a complicated tangent, which again, this was surprising, not because of anything to do with Lando himself, whom Han, despite their long and often unhappy history together, actually likes, most of the time, but rather with what Lando was bringing to this table, well, less what than who. Lando Calrissian, unlike his old buddy Han, had hung on to his general's commission. He was currently the Director of Special Operations, a fancy-sounding title that apparently involved today being a highly decorated chauffeur. He was on his way back from Mandalorian space, where he had gone to Corral, the one guy in the galaxy Lando claimed could change the alleged minds of these commandos, the big boss of the Mandalorian protectors and self-styled Lord Mandalore, Fen Cheezer himself. Again, you don't need to go on these long tangents about how they have an unhappy history, you know. You can just tell us that they had an unhappy history. Leave it at that. You don't need to add that additional information. I'm told, or as Han usually thought of him, Finn, you so much look at Leia that way one more time, and I swear I'm going to pop your Mando skull like a bladder grape Sheezer. And then we're told that Sheezer and his men had given up the mercenary life and organised a cadre into the Colonel of the Protectors, whatever that's meant to mean, a kind of civic-minded volunteer police and freelance do-gooders, more or less, as it says. And as it says, which meant that Sheezer, on top of his born and bred Mezcaf, more studly than thou think, had piles more honourable than thou, more self-sacrificing than thou, and more all-around good guy than thou. And we're told that if Han was more inclined to be honest, which, you know, is not in principle, you know, I mean, that his problem with the Protector Commander had more to do with a sneaky suspicion that Finn might also be better looking than thou. And we're told that with how much attention this particular hero of Mandalore paid to Leia, and it just ends there. It's like, eh? And it says, and how much Leia seemed to enjoy it. It's just ends so it's eh. And the next sentence doesn't continue from that, which makes it just eh. And we're told this time Han is just willing to let Sheezer have the pleasure of spending time with Leia in the conference room, because he thinks as long as he gets his situation resolved, he figures just as long as it gets the situation resolved, and he wonders if this means he's grown as a person, and he wonders just how questionable this growth is when Leia pulls him over, and she was about expecting. And he was more than half expecting her to tell him how much she was looking forward to seeing Sheezer again, when she says that Luke's in trouble. And Han goes, what? And Leia Leia gives her head a little shake, the one that Han knows so well, which pretty much just says, I don't know why, but I don't like this at all. It's a feeling. He might... Hey, I worry about him too, but he can take care of himself, you know. There's stuff he can do. And he lays a comforting hand on her shoulder, and his voice trails off when he feels the knots in it, and the tension. And instead of him giving her comfort, she's giving him dread. And he sees a dimple appear on her mouth. And she says it's not just the Mindor rage, she thinks there's something wrong there and something bad. And Han goes, something he can't handle. And he says, I mean, we're talking about Luke here. Luke, I'm a space Vader and Palpatine alone in Skywalker, you know. And and Han thinks it's a pretty good line, but to him it even sounds hollow, even to him. And he asks how much trouble he could really be in, and Leia says she doesn't know. She doesn't know how much she could be trouble in, and the uncertainty in Leia's eyes also brings that uncertainty to Han's heart. And she says that if she knew, she wouldn't have even mentioned it, and they would probably already be going. The 3PO barges in as saying that saying to excuse him, but the Mandalorian commander is becoming restive and requesting a translation on this personal conversation, and he's saying not very respectfully, he might add, and Han's about to give him a gesture. It's about to give C-3PO a gesture to ask him to translate that to the Mandalorians, but Leia stops him, and she just asks Han to try and find out and try the comm center, and the RRTF will be in subspace contact. And she says to just make sure he's all right and tell him to be careful. And she says to tell him she has a bad feeling about this. And Han makes his way over to the hangar where Chewie's working on the Falcon, and Han explains that they have an errand to drop in and pay Luke a little visit. And he explains to Chewie that his task force went dark about 10 minutes ago, and Leia's got a feeling he's in trouble. And he explains it was just like com-ops. And Chewie begins to ask another question, and Han says that he doesn't know what they can do about it, maybe nothing. But he says that and they can find out what's going on. And he says, I can't, Chewie, you know me, you understand, I just can't leave him out there. No, she asked me to try to contact him. She doesn't know we're actually going. And she's not gonna know. There's no way I'm gonna let her come along. Because, Han made a face, because I have a bad feeling about this too, he said, and vanished up the boarding ramp. And Lando is walking down the ramp with Sheeza, and he's in again all it's stylish, and Sheeza had commented on it, saying, don't recall ever seeing a Hollow of Madine in an outfit like that. That's because Griggs can't pull it off, Lando had replied with a shrug, admiring the jacket's cut in a full-length mirror. He carries a bit much in the middle, you know what I mean? And you're wondering why Mandalorian mercenaries don't seem to respect you. Lando grinned. I like being underestimated. I'm thinking it's mostly that you like your fancy clothes. If looking good ever becomes a crime, then, my friends, I'm ready to do life. And they make their way through the busy docking bay, and Lando's greeting and introducing himself to everyone there. And we're told he has a great memory. And they make their way over towards the negotiation, conference room. And they come across Leia, who's talking, and Lando lags behind, and he spots Leia talking to Sheeza, and he sees her face is red, and he assumes if Sheeza had, and so Lando goes up, and he says, Princess, I apologise in advance for my inadequate words, because as usual your beauty leaves me entirely speechless. And Leia just says, stow it. Answer me in question instead, Princess. Why is it that the only man I know under the age of 60 who is capable of even pretending to be a grown-up is my own brother? And before Lando can even answer, Leia just storms off. And Fen asks what's with her, and Lando says that she does seem a bit frustrated. And Fen says, I thought she's a diplomat, isn't she meant to have self-control? And Lando explains that she was once interrogated by Vader, and not didn't even blink. And he says, look up Unflappable on the HoloNet, you'll find her profile. And Fen says that she's sure flapping some right now, and Lando says, I'd say so. And Fen wonders what could get her so frustrated. Lando says it's not a what, it's a who. And he says, in her defence, he can make a Jedi Master throw a full-scale hissy fit. And she just says he must be talking about Solo. And Leia makes her way into the hangar, and, well, the Falcon is gone. And she picks up a wrench that Hannah used to get Chewie's attention, and she thinks she should have never sent Han in the first place, and should have made him, as it says, she should have made him stew in that stifling conference room listening to C-3PO struggle to find polite translations of that Mandalorian sneers, which I found incredibly funny. We're told that he hadn't been gone 10 minutes when she'd realised what a mistake she had made, because, and we're told it was because she didn't take herself seriously enough. And we're told that after even all these months, she couldn't make herself entirely believe that actual Jedi blood ran through her. And especially because it's the blood of arguably the most powerful Jedi of all time. And we're told that she had never gotten her mind around the truth, that instincts, intuitions and premonitions were all from, a lineage of the Force and from the Force itself, and were whispers of the Force. And we're told that she had sent Han because she really believed that he just went up to the communications centre, find out what happened, and come back, reassure, and says, and when he found out that all was well, he'd come back, tell us so, and maybe with a bit of teasing about some static to say, as it says, some static today on the Feminine Intuition channel, and return, come to grips with their Jedi heritage probably would have been easier for Luke, because, he hadn't grown up with the Jedi. He barely knew what it was. But for Leia, she had grown up in a household that revered the Jedi with a great respect. Her father, Bail, had always pretty much... He pretty much always... he always had a great respect from them and had many stories to tell from them. And he had spoke about how they had wholly dedicated their lives to peace and justice and sacrificed everything in the tragic Clone Wars. And it says, was it a wonder that she couldn't quite believe it, that one of those legendary heroes had been Anakin Skywalker, her real father, and that this legendary hero had somehow been transformed into the most ruthless, homicidal and terrifying enforcer of the Empire's tyranny. And that eager puppy of a Tatooine farm boy who had burst into a cell on the Death Star to rescue her, without the faintest ghost of a plan beyond a naive faith in the essential justice of the universe, was her twin, who now expected her to follow in easily at their father's footsteps. And we're told that it's just too preposterous, and she might believe it if it happened to someone else. And we're told right up until something equally preposterous would happen, like sitting in a bleak conference room on an endless asteroids and suddenly knowing that flat out that her brother, who is thousands of light years away, was just so deep in danger even he couldn't survive. And we're told that then she still had to hack through the thickets of the I'm just being silly thoughts, and And then when she did finally realise what was going on, was happened, and invited her, and it says what finally had cleared her mind and righted her course was the added premonition after some 15 minutes spent fitfully waiting for his return that now Han was also in danger. We're told that even then she'd become alarmed enough to give a very lame excuse to the Mandalorians to excuse herself and leave the room and make her way up to the communications centre and pretty much follow Han's footsteps to the communications centre, finds out what was going on. They told her the same thing they told Han, and she made her way over here. She just she just knew that Han would get out of there as fast as the Falcon's engines could get hot. And she also knew why, because Han could know all either friends in danger, and then he could jump to light speed by flapping his arms, as it says. And she knew that he'd leave without telling her because he wanted to protect her. And she just finds the masculine notion, as she thinks, silly. Sorry about that. Again, she finds the whole notion of Han wanting to protect her by leaving her behind silly, especially because now she's putting herself in danger just by leaving her behind. And we're told just how silly this notion was something she planned to demonstrate when she finally caught up with him, and we're told that maybe she'd draw him a picture on his skull with the Goss wrench she has. And she thinks how can she catch him, and she starts wondering what Luke would do. And so she closes her eyes and starts and takes a deep breath or two, and she starts walking around, and she opens her eyes to find another Alderaanian pilot, Tycho, which I found this is a great name, Tycho Calchu. Tycho Calchu. And he wonders, and he says, Princess, aren't you meant to be in the conference room? And she says, forget the negotiations, there's a diplomatic emergency. And she says she's a rated gunner on the B-wing, and she needs him to get its space ready as fast as possible. And Tycho says, but you're a civilian. And we're told that Leia hates having to lean on her family to get what she wants. But she says that my mother was your queen, referring to Breha Organa, not Padme, because Tycho's Alderaanian. And she asks, and she says that you've been an Alderaanian much longer than you have been an officer, and will he do it, or will she have to ask someone else? And Wedge comes over and asks how the negotiations are going, and she says, hi Wedge, hi, and she wouldn't, and she says that another friend she'd have to lie to, and she says that something's up, and she needs to borrow Tycho and his B-wing just for a few hours. And Wedge says that if it were up to him, but Lando says that is General Lando Calrissian, is a real nice guy, but when you disobey him, he doesn't joke about. He has no sense of humour at all, as he says. And she looks around, and she wonders why the Force would have sent her here, and she wonders what Luke would do, and she closes her eyes, and she opens them, and she looks at Tycho and Wedge again, and doesn't just see them as a vehicle man and a roadblock. And she explains that Luke is in danger. And Wedge asks what kind of danger, and she explains the fatal kind. And Tycho looks at Wedge, and they have a bit of consideration. And then Wedge nods at Tycho with a decisive nod, and Tycho sprints off. And Leia wonders what's going on, and Wedge explains they're preparing explains that he's going to round up the rest of the Rogue Squadron, and he says 15 minutes. Now Lando's in the conference room, and he's just about got on board of the whole conversation as well. And Fen Shiza isn't really assisting that well. Isn't really doing that well in terms of trying to convince the Mandalorians, unfortunately. And we're told that that tells a bit about Fen and what he's like. And we're told that about half an hour in Lando wonders how Han was able to endure 2 days of this without taking his own life. And about after an hour, he realises that Han and Leia aren't going to be back anytime soon. And nearly another hour passes before the ensign is sent looking for Leia returned to the conference room door. And it says that the look on his face either indicated failure or chronic illness. And Lando explains to Fen to cover for him. And Fen says that he doesn't blame him. And he asks, "Are you as sick as this fellow as I am?" And Lando says that he never gets sick of people. And he'll be right back. And he makes his way over. And the ensign explains she was last seen getting to Lieutenant Kelchu's B-Wing. And Lando has a big smile and he keeps widening it throughout the conversation, which makes it really funny. And the ensign continues saying that they lifted off over an hour ago. And he explains that the traffic control said they were on one of Lando's special missions. Commander Antilles gave the verification code. And yes, and the ensign asks if there was a problem. And Lando says, "Why would there be a problem?" And the ensign says, "Well, the princess had just been up to Comops, sir. She was asking about General Solo." Of course she was. And General Solo had been there just a few minutes earlier. He was asking about General Skywalker. And what did General Skywalker have to say? "Oh, well, nothing, sir. I mean, he's out of contact. The whole RRTF has gone dark." "Has it? Wow. Yes, sir. And there is this as well, sir." And the ensign hands him a data reader. And he explains that it's a transcript of a automated burst transmission that was sent. That's been sent to the HoloNet that's been fed into the HoloNet, over and over again, about every 5 minutes. And the transmissions began less than a minute after the RRTF went dark. And they haven't verified its authenticity yet. But he explains that it's probably from Lord Shadowspawn. And he claims to have captured the entire task force and says they will kill them in 3 standard days unless the Republic agrees to immediate ceasefire and acknowledges his claim to the Imperial throne. And he hands it over to Lando because he thought it might have something relevant to the missing generals and princess. Again, the ensign reaffirms that they don't know if it's authentic yet, and they have no way of really knowing if it's true. And Lando says, "Sure we do. It's all true. Luke's already there. Han and Leia are on their way, not to mention Rogue Squadron." "Sir, I don't understand." "That's because you're new around here, son." "Sir, forward your personnel file to my exec. I can use a man like you." The ensign's mouth dropped open. "Sir, I failed." And Lando continues on saying he'll promote him to junior grade lieutenant. And he just saved the general from being bored to death. And he could give him a medal too if he could get away with it. And the ensign's is just completely ecstatic. And Lando makes his way to the negotiation room and says that negotiation's over, the Mandalorians have won. And Shiza frowns and goes, "They do?" And the commander blinks and goes, "We do?" And he's forgotten that and the commander forgets that he's being a nuisance and not speaking basic, which is just English. And Lando says that sure, they'll put it in writing that the Republic forces will not occupy land or orbit the world or system while they live to serve the Empire. And Mando cleverly manipulates the conversation to tell the Mandos that the Empire aren't going to pay them, but he has a job for them that he'll pay them for, because the Republic will need them, and they're not going to leave them in the dark. And the Mandalorians think it over, and the commander says, you will pay us in advance, or something along the lines of that. It just says in advance, but, I need to give you the context. So that's where we end this off. Give me a moment. So, I think first we need to kind of talk about this book. I did figure out that, okay, it's not 300 pages, like Wikipedia said, it's 366 pages. Which does change the average from 16 to 26 pages per chapter, which I hate. If you know me, I hate any chapter that goes over 15 pages. When I was reading the Dark Forces novels, I could probably read 15 pages in about an hour, maybe two. 17, that pretty much put on an extra hour somehow. But I quite enjoy this chapter, you see Han's impatience, you kind of see why he's bored. But I do think, this chapter, at least with the first segment with Han in the conference room, it suffers massively from the overall problem of this book, which is it just gets too detailed and goes on long tangents, and those tangents are too complicated, too convoluted, and too detailed to actually make sense. They don't make sense in the long run. If you need to go back to read what's going on, and it's not something that can immediately click, and I'm not saying that all writing has to be like that, sometimes you can write a really well-written, complicated thing that is intentionally meant to not click immediately, but when it's like this, when it is meant to immediately click, you're not really right, it's not really well written, you could have easily, even like I was saying with the Lando stuff about Mando and Han's history, you could very easily cut out that little extra bits after we were told about how they didn't really have a happy history. You could have easily cut out that little extra bit afterwards, and that would make the whole line make a million more times sense. It gets complicated, a bit too complicated. But I like how we're seeing all the different perspectives of the characters. How Leia's just, for some reason, Leia's just seems to be really frustrated in this book. How Han's very just kind of carefree so far. Leia, she's kind of been putting Han in his place. And I like how Leia's really not taking any nonsense from Han, and she's kind of punching herself from believing that Han would make a sensible decision to stay behind and take her along if he was to go. You really just see that frustration coming from her. It's really good. It's really good. A conversation between Mando and the ensign as well. For me, I just found that really funny, because the whole conversation, Lando is described as having this big smile on his face, and then it's described as getting even wider as the conversation goes on, and it really feels like it's a very forced smile by the way it's being described. It's hilarious. It's absolutely hilarious. Another. It's interesting that now the Mandalorians are going to have involvement. I think my main concern is probably going to be there's too much going on. I think it was fine before with just Mindor, with Luke going to Mindor. But my main concern now is that there's going to be too much going on in the book. Because we've only got 18 chapters. We've just wasted 5 of them and the briefing, which, that's not really a proper chapter. We only have 14 more chapters. And that's really not a lot. Now, of course, this is still a book. We still have a bunch of pages to use up still, but you know, chapter-wise, it's not really a lot. And you know, it's usually a chapter is very secluded in it. It's usually on a certain point in time and topic. You know, so it's a bit. Don't have a whole lot of time here, chapter-wise. So yeah. One thing I was thinking about this chapter though, I was really dreading reading it because I knew it was 20 pages, and I hated the previous chapter. I still hate that chapter. It's just way too complicated. And that's, again, it's just a problem with this book. It gets too complicated and convoluted. And I don't think I'll be rereading it anytime soon, if I do finish this book. So yeah. But I think that brings an end to this review. Maybe I'll record another section for this and add a bit more onto it. But yeah, thank you all for watching and goodbye. Hello, sorry, I am doing another part to my chapter 5 review, because I didn't get a whole lot in the previous one, so I apologise for repeating a bit. It's been a little while since I did that first review, a couple of hours, so I apologise for repeat stuff. The main thing I want to talk about is it's interesting seeing how Leia Organa's force sensitivity is coming out, you know. She, you know, we got glimpses of it in Empire Strikes Back, you know, when she senses Luke is in trouble. We're seeing that again here. She senses Luke is in trouble. And we get to see about how she's also doubting. She's doubting, you know, the Jedi as well, because she's not too sure how she feels, I guess, about having the Force, because the Jedi that she was told were so selfless and everything, all that kind of perfect world, for example, just came crashing down on her when she learned that Darth Vader was her father, was a Jedi himself, and she's just not quite sure what to make of all of it. And you really do see how, you know, it's affecting her. You see how she's a bit indecisive. It's interesting to see how that's affecting her character. Another thing I found very funny, you know, was Lando getting that message from the ensign about where Leia had gone about the Shadow Spawn, and he just makes his way straight back into the conference room and pretty much makes all those hours of conversation go to waste just by, in about 2 minutes, bringing the Mandalorians to his side. It is incredibly funny to see that happen. So, yeah. It's funny to see how he did that. And also, again, the conversation with the ensign. I know I brought this up before, but, you know, he's just having a big smile, which only makes it seem fun, which only makes that whole conversation funnier, because it's very much feels like it's a forced smile, and it's just sort of widening as well. It's a very funny thing. I also do like seeing Han kind of fantasise, well, think a lot, really. That's what I meant. You know, we see him thinking a lot at the start in the first 5 pages. Again, you really could have just cut out about 2 or 3 of those pages, because so much of it is just over describing stuff. You could have just simplified that. And again, that is, I keep bringing it up, it is a big problem with this book. It over details. It goes too much into detail. You don't need to tell us every single little detail. You know, you don't need to tell us how. You don't need to tell us every single little bit. You know, I've made this so painfully clear in all of my reviews, pretty much since chapter 1. It's getting frustrating at this point to repeat it, and it's getting frustrating at this point to keep reading it, and I'm only 5 chapters in. I've still got another, pretty much, technically 15 chapters. Actually not 15. Technically I've got another 14 chapters to go, because we've got the debriefing as well, which again technically doesn't count as a chapter, but let's be honest. Who's going to call who is going to refer to that as, who's going to say, you've got 18 chapters, a briefing and a debriefing? So you're just going to say you've got 20 chapters. Really, let's be honest. It's just easier to say that, so, you know, technically we've got 14 chapters, technically got 14 chapters left, and it's really annoying to read this book because of just how badly written the technical parts of it are. It's just over explained, and if there's any part of the book that's badly written, it is those bits. It is those bits. It's just so badly written. But the other bits, you know, when it's not driving you insane by how badly written the explanations are, it's pretty good. Aside from that, it's doing very well. I have heard that Matthew Stover is a very good author. Honestly, if any of his other books go into this much detail, I'm probably not going to read them. If over detailing is a common thing for him like this, it's just not going to appeal to me much at all. I'm definitely not going to read any of his other books unless it's Coruscant Nights, which actually I want to. That is the one thing. Okay, that was written by Michael Reeves, not. Okay, I was curious as to whether it was written by. What was his name? Again, Matthew Stover, because, you know, what was it? What's his name? Nick Ross, who appears in Coruscant Nights. And, you know, he's also in this book. He's also in Shatterpoint, which I'm fairly sure was written by Matthew Stover as well. And then we do a quick search. Shatterpoint. Novel. And yes, it was. So, yeah. But yeah, I think that brings an end to this review. I don't really have anything else to say. So yeah, yeah, nothing really else to say. So thank you all for watching, and goodbye. Hello everyone, I've just read chapter 6, I think it is. Yeah, chapter 6 of not Last of the Jedi. It's because of reading those books for 3 months of Luke Skywalker and the Shadows of Mindor. And I can thoroughly say that this is the first chapter I've read and only gotten mildly frustrated with, and it's so mild that it really doesn't matter that much. It's actually the first time in this book where I feel like my frustrations are more nitpicks. So yeah, which I think this is. I'm surprised I'm saying about this of all books. But anyway, we open up with Shadow Spawn speaking to a Maurice Prang, which is a very funny name. Asking, what do you mean Luke Skywalker is dead? And he wonders, and we're told a couple of things, and we're told that Prang feels very small, and that he's about to be stomped by Shadow Spawn's Wookiee heel, because he feels like a mouse spider, a Kashyyyk mouse spider, and we're told about how he's sweating as well, and how he's noticing how large and pointy and white Shadow Spawn's teeth are. And he sees Shadow Spawn smile, and he thinks that can't bode well for his future, and he wonders if this is why Click has requested to send this report personally. And he says that, he says, I had thoughts, my lords, that my lords might find this to be good news. You thought? The death of Luke Skywalker will be a substantial blow to the rebels. It will be a substantially greater blow to me. Tell me again, slowly. And Norris explains that the gravity slice worked as well as can be expected, given the rebels fired first. And Shadow Spawn says that they've been known to do so. And he explains that and Norris explains that the rebel flagship, while not entirely destroyed, was cut into 3 slices by the G-slice, and the 2 largest pieces are currently derelict in orbit, and the smallest section, which includes the bridge, which retain as it says, which retains some man, Wing Commander. Brang felt himself swallow again involuntarily. Yes, my lord? Speak to me of how you plan to capture Luke Skywalker. Plan to? My lord, the only evidence we have of his presence is a single unencrypted EM transmission, which could have easily been some kind of trick. Some kind of a trick. A trick? Luke Skywalker doesn't use tricks. The only evidence we need is that someone landed a third of a Mon Calamari starship using nothing but attitude thrusters. That's a Skywalker at work. And Norris doesn't quite believe that Skywalker's alive, but Shadow Spawn says that he is alive, and you would have felt him perish in the Force if he did die. And he says to find him alive and bring Skywalker to him, and make sure that no harm comes to him. And to do it as if his life depends on it, as if Norris's life depends on it. And Norris says that it will be done. And Luke has climbed out of the crater, and he looks down with a rad sensor back into the crater, I guess, and by the rim, just to kind of check the radiation. And we're told that they didn't have a lot of they only had only a little bit of Bacta, and it wasn't sufficient to treat the casualties they already had. So when he used his artificial hand with the radiation sensor, just as there was no, as it says, no sense adding to the burden by getting himself rad burns, which is just radiation burns. And we're told that at the base of the ring below him, R2 bounces from side to side, whistling a caution, and Luke says that he knows but he has to confirm destruction before they abandon this position. And it kind of forwards the Shadow Spawn's forces to get their hands on the next generation Mon Calamari tech, which again is very advanced, apparently, as far as I'm aware. And R2 has a bit of a scolding answer. Luke lets himself smile and says, once you get that roll of heads back in working order, you can do these jobs again. Till then, though. And R2 gets a bit defensive, and Luke says, if you worried as much about yourself as you do about me, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Honestly, I think you spend too much time with 3PO. And that feels like a very Obi-Wan line to say. I read that and thought, that's very Obi-Wan. And then the rad sensor flickers blue, then red, then blue again. And we're told that the radiation levels are low enough that Luke could risk a peek. So he does look. And it's about 15 metres steep, but it's about, what was it, several hundred metres in diameter. I thought it was like 5 kilometres, no, just several hundred metres, that's what it says. And we're told the sponginess of the volcanic rock appeared to absorb a lot of the blast. And as for the Justice itself, you can see that the scuttling charges, which is again just to destroy itself, it's kind of like a self-destruct, has been as efficient as everything else the Mon Calamari made, and the only pieces he could spot that were remaining were no bigger than his doubled fists. And we're told he would have taken a longer look, but all the sand and the dust and rock is whipping streams of it into his face, and he ducks below back behind the rim, and he fights the urge to wipe his eyes until he can produce enough tears to kind of run them down his face. And we're told that lacking Macta a scratched cornea would be no picnic either, as it says. And it takes a couple of seconds to retie, as it says, the scrap of battle dress blouse that he wore across his face. He held his breath till he got the rag in place and tight. Breathing that dust was even less fun than getting it in his eyes, but keeping out the dust was only a partial solution. The atmosphere itself was mildly caustic. He'd been dirt-sized barely a standard hour before a rasp began to scrape inside his throat with every breath. And R2 gives out some tweets and whistles, and he's still got an insistent warning, and Luke asks what it is, and R2 turns on the hollow projector, which show all the kind of asteroids. I guess it's asteroids. It says the astromech hollow projector leaves up trails of blue-tinged fire. The astromech hollow projector lit up trails of blue-tinged fire streaked toward the schematicized curve of a planetary surface. Luke bars his teeth and turned toward the south, where the lightning orange sky already blazed with an incoming meteorite storm. Again, oddly phrased. And he takes out his comlink and tells them to bring me. And he only actually gets his some static, and we're told that Mindor's heavily ionised metal oxide charged atmosphere makes communications difficult at best, and the power of a starship's comm suite was required to broadcast an EM message, again whatever that is, more than a kilometre or two, especially during the storm, since it's mostly metal oxides itself. And we're told remnants of meteorites in the barren rock they'd struck. And it says that you can actually see the caves where the crew has taken shelter. But it's just Comlink, just as it says, doesn't have enough juice to punch through it. And he says to R2 to type beam and alert to Tub Rummy and Suthernart, I think that's his name, STHONNRART, sorry. And he says to tell them to break up the perimeter and retreat into the caves. And Luke frowns as he starts to sense something in the force. And he sees something ahead, blasts of fire and thermal detonators. And R2 whistles, and Luke says, "Don't wait for confirmation, just get under cover." And he draws his lightsaber as he runs and says, "I'll tell them myself." And Tabrimi is as he says, it says that Lieutenant Tabrimi crumpled the transcript of the decrepit burst signal into his good hand as he stood up. "All right, you heard the orders," he said to the pair of ensigns managing the comm gear, his great black eyes swirling straight forward for emphasis. "Get everything backed up and move into the caves on the double. Everything out of sight until we get a command-coded recall beacon." Which again did make me can't go a bit but it's again nothing in this chapter really is worth complaining about compared to the other chapters. Looking at them, and I hope we get more chapters that are like this one. And we saw that every step again feels like a lance through his broken shoulder. Because he had an injured shoulder. I forgot to bring that up, and also R2 got an injured what was it? It's something to do with his leg. I think it was. But Tabrimi makes his way into the cave, but everyone's disappeared, and he turns around and to the common guys that he was just with, they've disappeared, and he sees one sinking into the rock, and he tries to lean down to grab him, but he sinks beneath. And then, as he stands up again, looking wildly around for just any sign of the hundreds of sailors and marines, something touches his ankle, and we're told the darkness exploded across his brain. And that's Luke. It says Luke watched the battle end while he was on his way. It's like, what battle? I'm curious to see what the battle was. Oh, it says from behind him all at once, under the Tabrimi stuff. From behind him all at once, blast of fire on full auto, the ear-shattering blasts of thermal jets shouted orders and cut short screams of wounding marines. He whirled back to where the ensigns had been taking down comm dish unit, and they were gone, both of them. The comm dish lay on its side, rocking in the gritty breeze. Okay, so there was a battle. But you know, they all sink into the ground, I guess. Luke watches the battle end while he's on his way, and he's using the Force to leap his way across the 2 kilometers and fly over there, and it takes him about 2 minutes. And we're told it doesn't end like any battle. There's no prisoners being carted away, no evacuation of the wounded, it's just nothing at all. There's no bodies outside or inside the caves. No one, no droids. And it's just the sound of the sand stirring in the breeze. And we're told, and the clicks of the cooling stone. And we're told that the air ekes out of the ozone of the recent battle. Of the recent blast of fire. And there's still the glowing snag as well. And Luke still sees all the items still there left by the people who were in there. And he kind of just slumps against, and he just he still senses the resonance of their emotions they had sensed, they're just more distantly echoes of what he had previously felt. And we're told that somehow, in the process of leading the entire task force into a trap, he has also managed to misplace several hundred people. Captured, not by Imperials, that was for sure. Killed? Disintegrated? Not leaving not even the dust behind. It didn't seem possible. It wasn't possible. He's not really upset because the magnitude of this is just too vast for an emotion, and he just leans against a rock. And you have a very kind of powerful moment here. With he asks Ben what he should do, what he should have done. Asks Yoda what he was supposed to do. And we're told that he knows all of this is wrong, and he has his back against the stone, and it just feels like everything is wrong. And we're told that he made wrong choices every day of his life, and we're told that in his mind's eye floats everyone that he killed, from Mindor to Endor, back to Yavin, back to even Owen and Beru. And it says, I guess I sort of thought everything was over. I got my happy ending. I thought I did. I mean, didn't I do everything you asked to? You asked me to. Master Yoda, you wanted me to break the rule of the Sith, and they're gone. Ben, you asked me to destroy Darth Vader. I did that too. Father, even you, Father, you told me that together we would throw down the Emperor, and we did. Now it's over, but it's not the end. It's never the end. And there's still a bit more. There's a bit more, Luke thinks, and we're told that he was hoping for a bit more of an happily ever after in there somewhere, but he was ready to die, and he still is, but he was maybe wanting a happily ever after for everyone else. But they're still fighting. It seems like it's for nothing because they're still fighting, and they'll always be fighting. He says it's like we didn't actually save anybody. And he remembers what Yoda had once said. Gone is the past. Imaginary is the future. Always now, even eternity will be. Which Luke had always interpreted as, don't worry about what's already done, and don't worry about what you'll do later. Do something now. And we're told that would be fine advice if he knew what that something should be. And we're told that if he had more experience as a general, maybe he'd know what to do. He just doesn't know. He doesn't know whether he should search for the missing men, go back to the crash site and await pickup, or try to send a signal to the forces in space. And he thinks that he should never have taken this job because he doesn't know what a general would be doing. He only knows what a Jedi would be doing. And that's when then he thinks, I do know what a Jedi will be doing, and he isn't sitting around feeling sorry for himself for starters. And he stands up because he notices the ground stopped shuddering and the thunderstorm outside changed to thunder of multiple sonic booms, and he walks outside and sees the TIE fighters, as it says, whipping through a transonic search grid, whatever that is. And Luke unclips his lightsaber and ignites it and draws the TIE fighters to him, and Shadow Spawn's forces, and a captain stares and calls out for Luke and asks if he is, and Luke says, if it's not too much of a cliche, take me to your leader. Luke held out his lightsaber inert on its open palm and smiled. If it is too much of a cliche, take me anyway. And we cut to R2, who's repaired his broken leg, and he's used his machinery to figure out the TIE fighters are there, and he thinks that he can risk a peek without being noticed. And then he hears the voice saying, "There you are, my little beauty." And this is the one part in this chapter that feels like it's going too much into detail, but it's just about comprehensible. I'll read it out for you. "There you are, my little beauty." The shout registered in R2's auditory sensors as a series of sonic impulses whose wave characteristics corresponded to the natural vocal production of a human male speaking, basic with a distinctively in-the-rim accent. R2 instantly filed a copy in his medium-term audio log because he knew from a long experience that C-3PO derived a great deal of pleasure analog from analysing distinctive vowel/consonant interactions to deduce the planet of origin and region of that planet, not only of the speaker in question, but also the speaker's parents, childhood companions, teachers, and if applicable, mate or mates. R2 himself was confident, over 73% probability, that this accent would turn out to be native to Mindor. But he was content to leave such final determination to the experts. After all, every droid has to be good at something, and C-3PO had a long history of unpleasantly human-like insistence on his innate superiority in such matters. So R2 also filed a memo to pretend complete ignorance, which he estimated might prevent as much as 37 minutes of pointless bickering. And this would also probably prevent 37 minutes of pointless over-explanation if it was just cut out of this book. Anyway. And it says that R2 uses his threat assessment algorithm to also register the origination point of the shout. It says some 87 degrees from the planetary north. And the person comes over and grabs R2, and he gives him a little bit of a shock, literally. And another one comes up, going, "Bokeh! That little grubber killed Bokeh! Give me that ion blaster! Cancel that!" And it's Aona. That one. It's Trip and Aona. And Trip says, but he kills Bokeh! He's not dead. He's just learning about keeping his hands to himself. Now stow that blaster before I take it away and feed it to you. But I was only Trip. Alright, Aona. I mean, geez, you can't force a guy for getting... Sure I can now. Back off. I want to talk to this thing. And she comes down to R2. And R2's quite curious at the inventiveness of the lava suits. And she says hello to R2 and asks what he's doing all the way out here all alone. And Trip says that he's waiting for a junk dealer and says, "Can you believe how old that thing is? If it ain't effective, who's leave it out here? I say we blast it and break it up for parts. And Aona says that what counts is what she says. She says, "Not mine, Trip." And Trip says, but they've got some newer models that are really not in good shape and they need those parts. And the woman shifted into an expression that R2's optical analysis algorithm can't pass, as in P-A-R-E-S-E, sorry. Which I feel like is almost like the opposite of pass would be a very good description of different parts of this book. The convoluted, complicated, unnecessarily over-detailed parts. He triggers his threat assessment, and he decided it would be a wise thing to do to warn these humans of the possible consequences of aggressive action. And so he takes the recording he had of Han Solo's rescue in Return of the Jedi and modifies it with Mindor and these people, and replaces the Gamorrean guards and servitors of Jabba with these people, and it has Luke, and it winds up showing it with Luke slashing them all down. And Chip says, what is that supposed to be? Is that little grubber threatening us? And Aona says, shut up. And says, and she softens as she looks at Martu, and she has a bit of awe again. And she says, that's a Jedi. And Chip says, you don't really believe that thing, do you? The Empire wiped out the Jedi before I was born. Not before I was born. The woman stared at Luke's image. This little fella belongs to a Jedi. And that's who he's waiting for. I'm thinking maybe we should wait with him. I'd really like to meet this Jedi when he finally shows up. We could use his help. What if whoever turns up turns out not to be a Jedi? She stood and shook off that gentle expression like a bad dream. Then we take their ship and leave them to the Melters. She shrugged. Saves having to kill them ourselves. And then we cut over to Luke. And the gunship with the Shadow Troopers lands down. And they order Luke out. And Luke looks around and he thinks and he notes how they're letting him look at all their defences, and he thinks that they're probably expecting him to not get out of this place. They don't seem to have any plans to let him go. And it's a whole platoon around him, and he sees one of the pawns as well, and he thinks that he probably would have mistaken them for Shadow Spawn if the body beneath wasn't of a female. And we're told that she's carrying his lightsaber and she stinks of the dark side, and there's just something very wrong about her. And as they're walking, Luke spots all the caverns and stuff, and he sees something on top of the volcanic dome. And he asks one of the troopers to tell him what that is. It says, and there was a single emplacement of some kind at the uppermost curve of volcanic dome in the middle of the ring of the surface orbit cannons. It appeared to be covered in some kind of heavily armoured shell. He turned to one of the stormtroopers, who marched at his side and pointed up at it. Tell me what that is. We're also told there's the surface orbit cannons, and there's also cannons for the turbo lasers for ground assaults. And he feels the pulse in the Force, and he's able to look over his shoulder in time to see the pawn touch her fingertips to her lips, and then flatten her hand, palm down. And one of the troopers says, "You heard her," and Luke goes, "I did." The trooper says, "No talking. We know what Jedi can do." And he's also hit with a carbine. With the trooper's blaster firmly into his kidneys, unfortunately. And Luke says, "Please don't hit me," and he keeps asking to not be hit. But he keeps getting hit, and he says, "I heard you, but I don't see any particular reason to obey you." "Obey this." The trooper tries to whack Luke again, but Luke grabs it with his flesh hand, and then the troopers start to open fire on him, and he stops 5 blaster bolts with his mechanical hand. And he says not shoot him either, and he continues this way, and the troopers are just astonished, because all that's left of those blaster bolts is just smoke coming from Luke's hand. And Luke says, "Let's try to end the day with nobody else dying, shall we?" The stormtrooper sneered. "Tell that to Lord Shadow Spawn." "I plan to," Luke said, "and that's why I'm here." And that's where we end the chapter. I want more chapters like this in this book. I really hope this is just not a one-off, even though it probably is. This was such a good chapter. It's probably the best chapter we've had so far, because it's the only chapter to not have anything convoluted. Now, again, there was that thing about 3PO and the accents. No, that's not really that bad, really. It's not that bad. At least you can kind of comprehend. At least you're able to comprehend. At least for me, I was able to comprehend it with some ways as to what it was going on about. Which is just that C-3PO is able to identify the point of origin. It's just all the technical terms in there that makes it confusing. you know. And, you know, it also had that funny line of, so that would cut out 37 minutes of, a pointless bickering, which again, that was quite funny. But yeah, this was quite a good chapter. I really enjoyed this chapter, actually. So, yeah, I'm not sure how much I have to say, though. I'm not sure how much I have to say. It's interesting that they're all falling into the rock. And it does make you wonder, has Shadow's spawn got anything to do with that? Because we were told that he can kind of shape the rock into whatever he desires, really. So it makes you wonder, is he sinking them all into the rock? Is he influencing the rock? Yeah, it's very interesting. I do get a bit confused to begin with about Luke. It's only actually when summarising this I realised that they'd already escaped the crash point, and Luke was scouting around to make sure that the crash site was completely destroyed. I only recognised that when I was summarising this. So yeah, at first I thought he was actually getting out from the crash sites, which again confused me. And also, you know, Luke, when he's trying to communicate with Yoda, Ben, Anakin, you see just how defeated he is, how he's had the guidance he's needed before, but he's just not getting it anymore. So it really, you know, that is again quite, I guess, hard hitting, I guess. And you know, you have him talking about how he was ready to die, but it just feels like everything they've accomplished was for nothing, because they're still fighting. People are still dying. It doesn't feel like they've actually saved anyone. Even though they've accomplished so much, it just doesn't feel like they've actually done anything. And you see how Luke's feeling quite defeated in that moment, and he just can't make sense of anything that's going on this planet either. And I hope we get more writing like this from now on, because I do not want to read another chapter 4. I do not want to read another chapter like chapter 4. Oh, sorry. Computer screen is turning off. I do not want to read another chapter like chapter 4. Ever. That was a bad chapter. A really badly written chapter. And it's not that it's not the thing in there was... It's not what it was... It wasn't what it was telling was bad. It's not the story itself in the chapter that was bad. It was the way it was written. That was awful. It was awfully written. And... It needed to be rewritten. It needed to be rewritten just to cut out all that overcomplicated, overly detailed, overly convoluted stuff in there. It just was not enjoyable to read in the slightest. And again, you remember my review, I was seething at that chapter. And I get angry thinking about it as well. So yeah, it is also I do quite like Luke's little display at the end of this chapter, you know, where the troopers are trying to detain him, but Luke, you know, he's just proving that no matter what they do, they're not going to be able to stop him. And even telling him that no talking, we know what Jedi like you can do, and it's you know. It's funny to see Luke put them in their place and just show how helpless they are. It's quite funny. Also, this is the first appearance of the Shadow Troopers as well in this book, I think. You know, we've been described as having the black armoured troopers in this already, but they've all been pilots, so, you know, and the TIE pilots usually wear black anyway, so, yeah. What else can we talk about? Again, it's going to be interesting to see what goes on with R2. I'm going to be interested to see what goes on with R2. You know, that's going to be interesting to see what goes on there. Next chapter seems to be focusing on Han Solo again. which I'm a bit disappointed with. I kind of wanted to see the meeting between Luke and Shadow Spawn next. But, you know, the thing is, knowing how this book goes, we'll probably wind up cutting away to that in this chapter. Or it'll be in the next, or it'll be in either the following chapter or maybe the chapter after. So, you know, we probably won't have to wait too long for the meeting between Shadow Spawn and Luke, which, again, I'm going to be really interested in seeing, because, again, they've met before as Black back when Shadow Spawn was known as Black Hole, you know. So I'm going to be it's going to be very interesting to see what that interaction's going to be like. Seeing, especially because they're probably now going to be face to face properly. I know, again, it may be Nick Cross-Stew though. I know Nick Cross-Stew is commonly associated with Shadow Spawn in the lore. Is commonly mistaken to be Shadow Spawn, and so it does make you think, wait, where is Shadow, which parts are Shadow Spawn, which parts aren't, you know, but yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this all unveils. I really enjoyed this chapter. I probably haven't enjoyed a chapter this much since probably Last of the Jedi. Even the briefing got a bit convoluted in explaining Lord Skepton's backstory. And that was the least complicated chapter of them all so far. It's technically not a chapter. So, you know, it's also chapter 6, which is the least complicated chapter so far in this book. I really just want more chapters like chapter 6. You know, this was also a fairly shorter chapter compared to some of the recent ones we've had. You know, the previous ones, the previous couple went over 20 pages or on to 20 pages. This one went on for 16. This was a much more digestible chapter. So yeah. I also wanted to read this now, because I knew if because at the moment, while as I'm recording this, it's almost 3 AM. But I wanted to record this now because I knew, read this now. I read it about quite a little while ago now, you know. But, you know, I wanted to read it now because if I didn't read it now, I would up getting too tired to actually read it. Or by the time I get round to, or by the time I'd be starting to finish it, I'll be getting too tired to properly focus on it. So I wanted to get it out of the way now. So I've read 2 chapters today. So yeah, anyway, I think that brings an end to this review. So thank you very much for watching, and goodbye.